I think of Cubase as a laboratory. I think of Cubase as an environment. There are constantly new ways of approaching the environment, and I think that's actually really interesting. I think of Cubase as somewhere where we can create something. Hello, I'm Hans Zimmer. I'm really tired because we're in my studio and I've been working my socks off on this. Here, look. The Lion King. This is the original t-shirt from 1992, and it's weird. It shrunk a little in the wash, but only sideways, not lengthwise. I don't understand it. So we're in my room and we're going to be talking about Cubase, I believe. Something I quite adore. My studio, well, so actually some thought went into this room. The first thought was, if you build a room that's big enough, you don't have to worry about standing waves. I mean, you just get out of the way of the standing waves. So it's the length of it is bottom E, and the behind the synth is a Brilliant curtain that flaps around with anything that's below 40 hertz. The whole structure is floating. But I didn't want it to look like a studio, because I think I wanted it to look somewhere where people wanted to talk, where people wanted to make music, where people didn't get a sense of time, didn't get a sense of urgency. It's a room that invited ideas. And I have to say, I think I managed to do that. We managed to succeed in that respect pretty well. And what happens here all the time is, somebody starts tapping something, next thing you know, somebody's playing something. We've recorded whole scores in here of just people plugging in and playing and just having ideas, and which is how it should be. There should be a sort of a democratic element to making music, and as opposed to, this is not the most democratic studio, if you know what I mean. It costs a bit of money, but that being beside the point, that it feels like somewhere where humans can thrive, as opposed to humans are being treated as behind the glass, and I just don't like that. We use a weird hybrid system. I mean, Cubase is the center of where things happen, but we speak to Cubase through things, and Cubase speaks to devices which are built by Mark Rary, our tech guru. So we started with a cash register from a shopping center, and we had everything, we had the buttons all labeled, what was behind those little pull-down menus, because the button is where the button is. And then, of course, touch screens came along, so it made it a lot easier. But it meant we could involve macros and stuff like this. So our systems are highly customized. And again, that system speaks to our samplers. Mark designed our sampler, and it just, the main difference is it sounds very, 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 very good. But the main difference is we have another 32 tracks for microphones. We have another layer on top, basically. So you have 32 microphones, which you can mix down to 5.1, 7.1, whatever, Atmos, so if we're working on a comedy, we can still sort of use the same orchestra, but just change the ambience, and be very precise about the mixing. And I mean, we 99% of the time we use bespoke samples, which we started to do so in 1994. So it's been going for a year. And it's nice to have a sonic imprint from one place and to have everybody sitting in the right place. And at the same time, there's some sort of historical thing involved, because some of the players that we've sampled extensively aren't playing anymore. Or there's a cellist who had a Stradivarius, which he sold for vast amounts of money to a collector in Hong Kong. And so it's basically gone, except I still have it. I still have it, and I still have that performance he gave when we're sampling it. So So that is my sort of world. You know, I don't need a lot more. I just need to know the things that I use very, very, very well. I'm not a concert composer. I write film music, and that's what interests me. And so however we can make the sound that we want to make, we're going to make the sound. And however we get there is, whatever instruments we use is part of that journey. And part of it is we're trying to do it in a seamless way so that the hand of the artist is sort of stays invisible. At the same time, the advantage for the orchestra is they know the samples are pretty good. And so they can be a little bit more outspoken and reckless in their performance because they know if it goes wrong, Hans can just go and fix it with the samples. It's the same players, it's pretty much the same players sitting in pretty much the same chairs, mic'd pretty much the same way. You guys used to have a guy called Mark Badger working for you. And Mark Badger was the most argumentative person I knew. I had known him before he had worked for Steinberg, and he was always argumentative. You just helped him along on the path to true obnoxiousness. But I loved him. I truly loved him, and he was very, very smart. And I remember once making the fatal error of being incredibly pretentious and saying, "But Mark, you should talk to me. I'm a professional." And he just went off on me and said, "You're so wrong. It's the professionals who keep software from moving forward because you just want the same thing always. You just want to work, you just want to work in paper and pencil and do the same thing. It's some kid in a garage in Arkansas that's going to come up with the new thing, and that's really exciting." And he liked the democratization of ideas, and I loved that as well. And it really started to make me think about what, why, and how you buy software. I have been using Cubase so long that I can't remember, which has an advantage as well, a huge advantage I have over anybody getting Cubase now. I think the manual was about 5 pages long, because it didn't suffer from vast amounts of features. So it just had what I needed, and then it had a whole load of, and then it didn't have a whole load of things that I needed. And slowly, Steinberg and I sort of were on this journey together to get to where we are now. Cubase is much more of a come on in and go crazy and send us your crazy ideas and let's see what happens. Let's see what sticks, which I thought was a more interesting way of working and a more inspiring way. It's sort of how I work. So ultimately, when you buy a piece of software, you're buying the mentality, the philosophy, the Weltanschauung of the people who are writing the software. So does that agree with you? That's the only difference these days. Am I learning more things in Cubase? Yes, I wish I could as time goes on. Yes, time is going on, and Greg needs to come back and give me yet another refresher course. There are constantly new ways of approaching the environment. And I think that's actually really interesting. It's like, and that's why I like working with the other composers here, because they do approach it in a much more like reckless way than I do, because I come from the days of Cubase where if you were a little too reckless, the whole thing would just crash on you. Which it does. It's been. I can honestly say, it's been completely solid for as long as I remember, and I can probably remember 10 years back. The way we work and the detail that we can reach by and the immediacy we have by seeing all the controller lanes is such an advantage to any other program. So don't even bother, Go onto YouTube and watch what people are telling you. Watch Greg's thing, for instance. He's a great educationalist. You need somebody to explain it to you. And the best thing you can do is have a friend who uses it, and buy him dinner and hang out with him. I mean, we have this all the time here. We have interns and they learn Cubase, and they learn what parts of Cubase to know, for our job-specific applications. So depends on what you want to do, so learn the bits you want to do. I mean, Ben works very differently from me. We both get to the finish line in one way or the other. But, and Greg works very differently from me. And when he came over, it was sort of eye-opening to us. You can't learn in a day either. The thing about any program, anything like this, is you have to make up your mind to, is this who I am? Am I going to dedicate time to it? Am I going to take it seriously? That's why your questions about how easy it makes my workflow are irrelevant. Because it's not about how easy it makes my workflow, it's, are you a dedicated musician or are you just going to chuck in shit? Before I walk into this room, I've already driven everybody that works here crazy by going, what I need is and we need to go out and we need to sample this and we need to go and create this sound, And so by the time I get in here, my template's pretty full. You have the orchestra, if it's an orchestral thing, and that is a sort of a given, what that is. And then you have all the other, the destroyed piano, the, whatever the weird stuff is that I can think of at that moment in time. All right, Lion King, here's a perfect example. So 1992, I am doing the opening Circle of Life, Elton song, but I'm rearranging it and I'm going crazy. And at 6 o'clock, the director and the producers are coming. And it's 2 minutes to 6, and I still have another chorus to go or whatever. And I can hear them ring the doorbell, and I haven't arranged the other chorus yet. So I just went boom and put that big drum in. And that became the movie. And now when we went back to research what I'd actually done, I'd totally forgotten this. We found this whole other verse and chorus after the boom that is sort of hanging there in half arrangedness, and you will never hear, because so does it make it faster? No. What makes things fast is you making decisions. It doesn't make decisions for you. Lion King's been sort of really truly all-consuming, and plus my life has changed since I decided to go and become a touring musician. I think one of the things which I think is so remarkable about what you Cubasers have done in the last 30 years is that you've recognized and acknowledged that there's music that goes beyond whatever, 4 on the floor disco, whatever it is, I really don't mean to be insulting in that way, but that you've helped give us the tools to support the orchestras, to make it easier for the orchestrators, to make it easier to put in front of real live people. Because for me, one of the burdens I feel as a film composer constantly is that we are the last place on earth that supports and commissions orchestral music. And once the orchestra goes, I think there will be an enormous gulf within humanity. So Cubase is part of that journey that actually allows people still to become real passionate musicians and join the orchestras and keep the orchestras alive.
Well, hello and welcome to the October edition of Steinberg Sessions. So there's a couple of, I know that's not a new video, it's a really old one, but there's a couple of reasons why I was inspired to share that one tonight. First of all, I saw Dune, the new Dune, and I have to say, Hans Zimmer actually scored the picture. And I have to say that whether or not you are a fan of his work, or whether or not you are a fan of the genre, it is an absolute masterpiece, both visually and orally. The sound in that movie is, I saw it in IMAX, so it was pretty amazing. And the score is, which clearly was done in Cubase, is mind-blowing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and all the sound effects, just the audio. So if you're not a fan of the genre, I'm recommending you check it out anyway. If you don't want to watch the pictures, just close your eyes, and I promise you that that film will be every bit as entertaining with your eyes closed as with your eyes open. Well, maybe not every bit as entertaining, but I can't emphasize enough how incredible it is. Anyway, the other thing that Hans said in there, which is related to a journey that I'm on myself kind of right now, and I was going to share it with you anyway, and I saw the video and I thought, wow, this kind of ties it all together. He said something very poignant, which you may have missed, but it was poignant to me. When the part where he's talking about professionals, they just want the same thing all the time. They just want to keep working in the same way. And I could relate to that because, you know, in my many years of producing as a full-time producer in the studio, like 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, it was a challenge for me to either upgrade my software or upgrade my plugins or upgrade my computer. And the reason is because I had so much work happening and I was in the middle of projects all the time, and you just didn't have time for a learning curve, and you just didn't have time to try a new way. So, you know, what you would do is you work out what works for you and what will give you the sound you're after, and 9 times out of 10 you would just go straight there. Well, fast forward a little bit, and you know, for those of you that have watched some episodes, you know I'm working on an EP with Siobhan, and the sound of the EP is a bit of a departure from a lot of the things that I've done in the past. So, you know, when we started to work on it, I went to those places that were sort of normal for me, and I was using the plugins and the template and the approach that I had always used with a fair amount of success, and was comfortable, and I could rely on, and I knew it would get me to an endpoint that I would be happy with. But the problem is that the more I worked on things, the more I realized that getting to that finish line was taking me a lot longer than it would be if I had just been more open-minded to try some new approaches and try some new plugins and try some new ways of working. And so what I started to do is I started to do that and try new things, and I found that I was getting to where I wanted to much more quickly and a little out of my comfort zone, because there were certain plugins, which we'll talk about in a second, that were my faves, and rather than just automatically going to them, I would look through my plugins, and many of them I've had for a number of years and had stopped using years ago because for whatever reason I felt there was another version that was better, or a newer plugin that sounded better, or a different plugin that sounded more like what I was looking for in the vast majority of my work. So looking back and going back and pulling up some plugins that I had sort of rejected and kind of eliminated from my life, even though they were on my computer, I've discovered some new wonderful things that don't sound exactly what I'm typically looking for, but they sound wonderful unto themselves. So I've got the session from the EP that we're working on right now. Like, we're right in the middle of the production as we speak. I think the release on this will be maybe in a week or two, because we're getting really close to the end. And so I want to show you this plug-in journey that I've been on. But I also, this was kind of an interesting song, this particular one. It's a duet, and so we had to come up with a way that we would handle cutting 2 vocalists and making sure that each vocalist felt really good about their performance, and how and the challenges that surrounded that. So I just want to talk a little bit about that, and editing vocals as well. But let's start with these plugins, and let's start on this journey that I've been on. So typically, for those of you that have watched, you know I like to do a lot of processing, sort of analog type processing to kind of warm up the sounds, particularly when I'm working with a lot of samples or virtual instruments or even external digital instruments. I like to process those instruments before I even get to a stage of mixing, just to kind of give them a more organic feel. And so a lot of times I'm talking about tape plugins and stuff, and my go-to for years now has been this one. And I just want to emphasize right up front that even though I'm not choosing to use some of these plugins that I've traditionally used for years on this particular project, doesn't mean I've abandoned them entirely or that I don't like them anymore. I still love how they sound. I still love what they do. I still think they're wonderful, and I will use them again. The point that I'm getting at here is every once in a while it's good to shake things up and to try some things that maybe in the past you had rejected as not working for you. And because all it does is when you discover new things that you thought weren't going to work, it just broadens your toolbox, and it just makes so that when you do make decisions in your productions, you have a lot more colors and a lot more palette to work with, which can only be a good thing. So, so this Slate virtual tape machine plugin has been my go-to for, well, I'm going to age myself, but I think I've been using this plugin for probably about 10 or 15 years now, from whenever it came out. And it's wonderful. And I've recommended it to a lot of my friends, and they're using it, and they're happy, and you should use it too. But it's funny because I have a whole bunch of tape plugins on my computer, and you know, I've used this one the most. There's some UAD ones which are incredible, maybe the most accurate sounding of all the tape plugins. But there's this one kind of strange plugin, this Kramer tape one, which actually was the first plugin that I ever got as a tape plugin. And truly, even from the moment I got it, I thought it sounded terrible. I just didn't like it. And so I maybe tried it out for a couple of weeks, and then it just kind of left my work. I just stopped using it altogether. Anyway, so when I started to kind of revisit this idea and try to find new things, I set up a track and I put all my tape plugins in, and I A/B'd them, and I messed around with the settings, and I just tried to find sort of a sound that was in line with what we're trying to do with the CP, which admittedly is sort of a little bit more, I don't want to say lo-fi because it's not a lo-fi thing, but it's like darker sounds, maybe a little uneven in certain places, certainly not a pristine sound, with the exception of maybe the vocals. We want the tracks to be a little more rough and tumble and a little edgier and just not quite high fidelity like a lot of the work that I've done was what I was going for. So anyway, this Kramer plugin is on every track on this new EP. So check it out, and it's really different. So moving on from there, and by the way, I'll play you an example in a second of what we're doing here, but this is my plugin chain for when I process the virtual instruments. And a lot of the stuff on these tracks has come from virtual instruments, VSTs that I can pull up from within Cubase. So, I sort of set up a couple of chains of my favorite sounds for this. And the one that I'm using now is the new one that I just came up with, which has none of the choices of things that I used to use. And so carrying on from there. So after the tape plugin, my traditional place to go was always sort of the Slate console. And a lot of times I would use the API because I have API preamps over here, and I sort of liked the sound of that. I would increase the drive a little bit here. And but sometimes I would use the tube sound just if I needed something fatter. But I went from the tape and then usually into the Slate virtual channel. Again, it's still wonderful. It's still an amazing plugin. But what I'm using now which I had never used. I had used the Neve one a little bit. In the UAD cards, there's a Neve preamp, and there's also this V76 preamp, and it just has a bit of a thicker, darker sound, which again is perfect for what we're working on right now. So I'm using that instead of this Slate virtual channel. Okay, so there's two. So moving on. Next, I would usually do a little bit of EQing, and when I'm processing virtual instruments, I'm not doing too much carving with an EQ. It's more just to sort of like darken the top or thicken up the bottom, or if there's something in a sound that is kind of sticking out a little bit too much, I may EQ it out. But it's more just sort of color shaping EQ that I'm looking for. So my go-to for most of my life since I got it is this UAD Pultec filter, the HLF 3C, and I still use this when I'm mixing. I still love this plugin, and it's still very high on my list. But then after that, I would usually go into the Neve Portico, which is actually a Steinberg Yamaha product. This is one of our plugins. It's discontinued now, but if you can find it somewhere used, it's an incredible plugin, and it sounds an awful lot like hardware. But in any case, these were sort of my go-to EQs, and I still use this Portico on mixes. A lot of times I'll use it on a 2 mix because it's so silky and smooth and wonderful. It sounds great for that. But again, inspired by my API rack over here, now I'm using the Waves API 550. And here's another one of those stories. I have the UAD API suite as well. And when I first got the UADs, I was convinced that they blow away the Waves APIs. And so after I got the UAD ones, I never used the Waves ones ever again because I thought, well, the UADs sound significantly better. Here's the thing. They do sound different, both the Waves and the UAD APIs. While they both have the API character, they do have a different sound. And the UAD would be better in a lot of cases for your project. But what I discovered in my little journey here is that actually, for what I was doing, the Waves API stuff actually sounded better. It actually sounded a little bit more along the lines. And when I would set them up with exactly the same settings, every time I chose the Waves ones. So again, a plugin that I had completely disregarded and forgotten about and sort of rejected, frankly, ends up coming back into my work. And it's perfect because, you know, when I'm shaping virtual instruments and actually this is the same EQ that I track with over here, the 550A. So, but it's great for tracking or for subtle shaping because you've got 3 bands and you don't have their fixed frequencies, and so you can't really get in and dig into the nitty-gritty and set a specific frequency and set bandwidth. It's a bit of a turn knobs until you get the sound that you want. And it has a high and low, like a filter built in, a high and low pass filter here. And you can change the high and low bands, shelving bands to not parametric bands, but bell curves. So, this is a super cool, versatile, simple EQ that I had forgotten about that I'm using. It also has, a lot of the Waves plugins have this analog switch that I know that some people really love a lot. I've got another Waves plugin that does an analog thing that's coming up that I'm using. So I don't tend to do this because I find that the noise can build up a little bit. It sort of seems to add a bit of noise at a low level, and on one track can be wonderful, but if you get too much of it, it gets a little noisy. So I tend to leave that off, but Waves API is back from the dead. Okay, moving on. Compressors. These are the compressors that I traditionally always used. There's of course this one, which you've heard me talk about a number of times before. And again, this Neve Portico thing sounds like hardware. It's phenomenal. So that's one that I use a lot. This is one that I know and love, the Fairchild 660. And I had an opportunity, I did a session at Abbey Road in London. It was a few years ago now, but in Studio 2, the Beatles studio, which was pretty incredible. And they actually have real Fairchild compressors there, which for those of you that know, A, there's not very many of these things in the world. And B, if you can find one, you're probably going to have to sell your house to pay for it because they're so expensive, because they're very rare and vintage and they're amazing. Anyway, I had an opportunity to use a real Fairchild, and while I can say that this UAD Fairchild emulation is really good and it's a really fantastic compressor and I really love what it does to my tracks when I do use it, the real thing is a whole other thing. It's on another level that I can't even describe to you. It was maybe the most amazing compressor I've ever used in my life. It was incredible. So, but anyway, I love the plug-in. This is the 660. There's a 670 as well, and they're both incredible. I encourage you, those of you with UAD cards, to check it out and try it out, because it's great, especially for things that are sort of rock and roll-ish. It has a real sound to it, and love both these plugins. If you don't have a UAD, you should probably buy one because they're pretty fantastic. But so those compressors, and there's another one that I tend to use a little bit as well. Plus these two is the Blue Stripe, the Blue 1176, also a UAD plugin. For most of my production career, the UAD compressors have been absolutely my go-tos, and they are phenomenal. They continue to be phenomenal to this day. Some of my favorites. But those are the compressors that I would tend to use when I'm processing. Now, again, down my little rabbit hole, I discovered some new things that I never used, and here's one of them. Oh, surprise! The Kramer Pie Compressor. Now, this was the same as the tape machine. When the Kramer tape plugin, when I got it, I used it for a couple weeks and I thought it was okay. The one plugin that I have used more from this suite is the EQ. They have sort of a Helios EQ, which is actually really good. And I've used it on and off throughout all my production time. As well as the UAD Helios plugins. They're both fantastic. But this compressor, again, I sort of rejected it. It lasted a little longer than the tape plugin, but I rejected it pretty quickly just because it was a character compressor, but it just, to me, sounded a little bit lo-fi or lacking in detail or whatever it was. And I just didn't use it for very long. So that ended up in my chain because it was amazing for what I was doing. And here's another one that I had sort of rejected. The SSL G-Bus compressor from UAD. Now here's one where the Waves compressor, G-Bus compressor, I used a lot over the years. But this one, for whatever reason, I just didn't get on with it from the first time I heard it, and it's one of the newer UAD plugins that I've gotten, but I just didn't have a use for it. It just didn't do anything that I thought I wanted. Well, sure enough, in this case, it turned out to be something that was amazing. And this one, which I have used a little bit on pianos, but not really much on anything else, is the Slate FG Gray, which is kind of Slate's version of an SSL compressor. And so here we go. Here's another plugin that I had ignored that is now getting all kinds of action. Okay, we're almost at the end. So my go-to at the end of the chain used to be this Waves plugins, the NLS, Nonlinear Summer, which is very simple. It's basically just a level and the amount of drive that you want, and you choose which type of console you want based on these three different engineers. And it should be reasonably easy to figure out which consoles they're emulating. And so I loved this, and I've used this mostly for the last, I'd say 3 to 5 years. I've used this on almost everything. Well, I loved, and the reason it was is because I liked all being able to switch between the different consoles, and I could kind of mix and match with this earlier virtual mix plugin, and it was pretty fantastic. Well, now, and this was inspired by something I showed you on the session from last month, or was it 2 months ago? Last month, 2 months? Can't remember. But anyway, when we did the first release off of this EP, I think it's going to rain today. And I was talking about using the Abbey Road vinyl plugin on the 2 mix, which I hadn't really done before except in 1 or 2 other instances. And I have a lot of the Abbey Road type plugins, but again, I wasn't using them as much as I thought I would when I got them. Well, I dug in, and I actually had, when I was at Abbey Road, I had a chance to be hands-on with this actual console that they modeled this after. But unfortunately, the console was not working that day, and we couldn't get enough channels working for me to be able to use it in the session. So I didn't get to use it in the session, but it was fun to play around with it in any case. But anyway, the red console is Abbey Road, and this is the sort of older version, which is kind of a less hi-fi sound than the other one. And it's got a little drive, and it's got the analog here, and so some very basic EQ, which I can use to sort of, if I didn't catch it in the first round with the API EQ, I can mess with it here. So this is the channel that I'm working with now, and I have to say, subtle things, plugins, it's easy to kind of nerd out on them and go down the rabbit hole, and sometimes at the end of the day, the amount of time you spend looking at plugins doesn't really turn into a huge difference in the music. But I have to say, in this case, it was worth the rabbit hole, because I am so inspired by the new sounds that I'm getting, and I'm so excited by how different and how much fun I'm having working a different way, and how much in line with what we're going for the sounds have become because of this. So every once in a while, it's good to look back and check it out. So what does it sound like? Well, let's have a listen. So what did I end up using? Well, on this, I'm going to play you just this organ sound. This is the organ sound from this song that we're working on. It's using the Arturia B3 plugin that's in here. That's what I'm using for this. And it's a bit of an atypical kind of organ sound. It's not a traditional organ part, but I really liked the sound of it. So this is what it sounds like just straight out of the instrument. Okay, so that's the sound straight out of the instrument. And so what exactly of those plugins of my new chain, I don't use all of them on every sound. I choose the appropriate plugins to get the sound that I'm after. So on this particular sound, I used the Kramer tape, I used the UAD V76 preamp, I used the API EQ, and then I used the Neve 2254. Oh, I left that out of my my little thing. This is another one that I'm super excited about. And why I was inspired to check this one out is because, you know, my new Neve analog, the 535 here compressor that I've been so excited about and I was freaking out about when I got it a month or two ago. Well, the Neve 535 is based on this vintage 2254. There's a vintage Neve compressor. This is just a model of it, of course. But, you know, I realized that I was a real Neve fan for preamps and EQs, but I hadn't really spent all that much time with their plugins. The 33609 a little bit, but I hadn't really done a deep dive on the 2254. So And actually, I didn't even know it was in my UAT plugins. That's how many plugins I have. It's terrible, I know. I live a privileged life. But in any case, so the 2254 was something I hadn't taken a deep dive on. It's mind-blowingly good, and it's the one of all those compressors I just showed you that the one I'm using the most. So I used it on this sound, and then of course I finished with the red console thing. So again, not a lot of processing, and you can see with the EQ, I just took a little bit out of the low end. I didn't do a whole lot. But in any case, I'm going to play you the organ straight out of the instrument, and then I'm going to play it for you what it sounds like processed, and it's very different and very cool. And I think once I play you, I'm not going to play you the whole tune tonight because we're not quite finished it, and it hasn't been released, but we'll work with the part of the verse here when we dig into the vocals, and you can check it out. But anyway, once again, here is the sound of just the organ all by itself, and let's turn it up to 0 here so that it's at unity level. Here's the organ sound straight from the Arturia B3 plugin. Okay, so what does it sound like processed? Well, that's over here. Here's the processed Arturia B3. Let's go back and forth one more time so you can hear it again. It's very different. Here we go. Here's the original. So you know what I mean by that kind of thick lo-fi? It's a little darker. That's what I was talking about. And those plugins, which I had rejected, are what got me there. Now I hope anyway, because we're going to release the song and we want you to like it. I hope that when I play you a bit of the track here, that you'll hear why, and you'll appreciate what we're doing there with trying to make the sounds out of the virtual instruments sound a little thicker and a little darker. Okay. I'm often asked the process for vocals, and I've showed you a number of times in the past, and I'm happy to keep showing you if you send me a message and say, hey man, let's talk more about how you process vocals in the mix, or I'm happy to keep talking about that. But the one thing I've glossed over a whole bunch since we've been doing this is the process for getting a edited finished vocal. I know we got lots of tracks, like there's lots of tracks in this tune. We're still sorting it out. Anyway, so this song, I explained off the top, it was a bit of a unique challenge for us. Siobhan and I wrote this with a friend of hers, a guy named Dante Brown, who you'll hear his voice in a second, and it's incredible. He's a young guy. He's 1 year out of high school. Just an incredible singer. And so we were pretty excited to work with him. And so the three of us wrote this. Mid-pandemic over Zoom we did it. I know I should have used VST Connect, but he didn't have a device that could run VST Connect. So we did it over Zoom. And anyway, so we're really excited about the song. The song turned out really cool. But the challenge was, when you have two singers, most of the time you have one singer. And so you come up with a bit of a track, and we've talked about that before. The singer comes in, and they kind of get to impart their vision of how they want the vocals to sound, and hopefully they work in conjunction with whoever is producing the track, or if you're producing the track yourself, hopefully you get along with yourself and you like the end result. But as a single singer on a track, as a lead singer, you get to really determine and define the direction a song is going to take with your vocal. But when you have a duet, it becomes a different thing. And so the considerations are, do we set up 2 mics and do we cut it live? Well, certainly that's a way to do it, and I think it could yield tremendous results and would be really fun and exciting to do. The concern I think that we had with doing that was, well, what if one of the people has a good day and the other person doesn't have a good day? What if they don't quite bring it together on the same day? Well, you could choose another day and do it again. But what if it's the other person is on that day and it's not? So I think it's really challenging. And for those of you that have done any amount of live recording, I think you'll agree, it's very challenging to have everyone that's performing together get their absolute best take at the same time. When it happens, it's magic. And if you're very experienced at doing it and have lots of time, then I think that's a great way to go. But in this case, we had never worked with Dante before, so we really had no idea what he was going to be like in the studio. And Dante and Siobhan are quite different singers. Dante does a lot of like riffing, and he has a very soft approach to his vocal. And while Siobhan has a soft approach in certain songs, in this song, her energy was a little bit edgier. And, Siobhan can certainly, hold her own when it comes to riffing, but they have different styles of riffing. So we weren't quite sure how that was all going to connect. So we made the decision, since we didn't know Dante's studio approach all that well, we would have Siobhan put down the initial guide vocal of both the boy parts and the girl parts, and then we would have Dante sing to the guide vocal, and we took out the parts that were his parts, and so he sang to Siobhan's guide vocal part, which was, decidedly very straightforward and just stuck to the melody and was very clear, so that we were giving Dante as much room as possible to do what he did. So that was wonderful, and we had a wonderful time recording the vocal. And that one here's the guide vocals, it's all chopped up, and guide vocal girl, guide vocal boy. The main part here is where they sing together. So there was that. Here's Dante's finished track here with a couple little add-ins. And then we have one more ad-lib down here that I'm still going to go through. He did a couple of things after the fact that were pretty cool. But for those of you that have seen my vocals before, this is what a track typically looks at. You can see where I've done all the cuts. You may wonder why the colors are there. When you see my track list of vocals, I love to record as many vocals as we can to make sure that we have tried all the different variations, and we've really turned over every stone when it comes to the vocals. So oftentimes I'm comping from quite a few vocals, and it can be difficult to remember which of the vocal takes I liked the best. So if I'm going through, and I've still got a whole bunch to go through, but I hear one that really strikes me as being strong, sometimes I colorize it just so I can remember which one it was. So when you see things colorized, that's one of my techniques. And as you can see with Dante's vocal, I'm not afraid to cut in the middle of a phrase, even in the middle of a word sometimes. That's something that I don't mind doing a lot. And depending on what's happening here, there can be a lot of cuts, or sometimes just, one phrase is just amazing and I just keep it how it is. So anyway, but you typically would see a finished vocal track like this for me. And so I thought it might be neat to kind of lift the curtain on that and sort of have a look at how I go about it. So we're going to look at Siobhan's vocal here, and let's look at what the tracks looked like right after we recorded it. So it's in this tracking folder. So actually with this, there's a section which I'm not going to play for you tonight. I'm going to save it, and if everyone wants me to, I can break down this entire production at a later date. But there's a part in the chorus that needed a lot of support and thickening. So what we actually did was, with Siobhan, we cut the harmony parts kind of as background. So when she cut her lead, we did that first. So when she cut her lead vocal, she could sing over top of it. And it's 3-part harmony. And as you can see here, we set up, well, I think there's 8 tracks here, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But it will in the end be 9, because you can see that I've got all these layers, and on any given take, she may have sung it a bunch of times. And so I always comp or compile or go through and edit all of these parts to make sure I have the strongest ones, and especially with harmony parts, I'm comping so that I have the ones that really match sort of tone-wise and phrasing-wise together in the stack. So this is a 3-part harmony times 3, so 9 tracks. And then when I have background vocals like this, I love to use auto-tune, and I love to detune sort of the 3 tracks. So one of them will be sort of really in tune, and then I may sort of detune one flat, like maybe 6 cents, and then the other one like maybe sharp 6 cents, and the average is this really nice thickening effect. So try that. That's a fun little tip. But in any case, so then we went to work and we did this over 2 days, because the challenge here was what I said before. Like, Dante had established the direction with his vocal, and we finished it and we comped it, and so that's a finished vocal. But now Siobhan had to find how she was going to fit in with that vocal. And again, some of it was challenging because of Dante's different approach to things, and so we made sure that we tried everything that we could, and it's going to end up being a wonderful vocal. I'm really excited about it. But anyway, we did it over 2 days because we didn't want to burn her out too much. So here's the 1 track, and we tried doing complete takes, but it turned out that it was better if we just worked on it kind of a verse, and then we would work on the next verse, and then do the choruses, and then do the ad-libs after. And so you can see here, it's just a stack of stuff. And so if I open it up and we look at the lanes, as you can see, all kinds of stuff happening here. And on the particularly challenging like words or lines, we did a lot of takes just to make sure that every stone was unturned. So that's kind of what's lurking in there. And then on day 2, which is down at the bottom here, similar thing. These are the choruses, and we did a bridge section here, and so there's that. But okay, so that's what it looks like when I'm finished tracking my vocal. So why is all this stuff in folders, you may be asking? Well, because I do a lot of editing and I do a lot of sort of messing around with, it's common for me to take a vocal from one part of the tune and move it to another part if I think it'll work. But I always want to be able to go back to where I was. And what I could do is I could just go back to an earlier session that I saved, but sometimes I find it's just easier to stay within my same session. So when I tend to finish tracking a group of things like vocals, I just bundle them all up. I select all the tracks and I put them in a folder, and I call it tracking. And then I just mute it, and then it's fine. And then I right click and duplicate the track. You can do that with a folder track if you didn't know. And then it creates a copy of my folder that I just made. So now I have a working copy that I can work with everything. So after I have all that tracks, then all those tracks, then the next thing I like to do, and this is a bit of an old school way of doing it, but as you can see here in the tracking, in the editing folder, I pull out each take onto its own track, and I sort of consolidate everything so that it's all sort of on the same tracks. So even when I have a lot of takes, everything is kind of condensed into almost complete takes, even when I've done it a section at a time. So this is the result of pulling it all out on tracks. And people may find, they may be asking, well, Brent, why don't you just edit in the lanes? And it's for this reason. First of all, I've been doing it this way for such a long time that, back to the Hans Zimmer video, sometimes professionals just want things to stay the same. I'm sorry. You know what? In the spirit of the plugins, I probably need to go and revise my approach to comping. But this works for me. So anyway, so I just pull them all out on tracks like this. And so then I can see everything. It's got its own track and everything's good. So there's that. And yes, I tend to do a lot of scrolling when I'm editing, although you can't see it. I've got a big monitor up here. It's a way bigger monitor, and that is a little bit easier for editing. I can see more tracks at one time. So that's good. So anyway, so there's everything pulled out. And then when I actually go to edit, which is the third, I just made another copy here of it. Then what I do is, as you can see, I mute everything, and then I slice up line by line throughout the whole thing. Let me zoom in here for you. So you can see I've actually got cuts surrounding each line. And when I start editing, I tend to go through line by line, and I find the line that to my ears sounds good, like overall good. It may have a beginning that's not as strong as another take, or an end that's not as strong, but I'm looking for just a really strong performance of that line. And then what I'll do is I'll put together my favorite lines, and I'll see if I can make it stronger by maybe taking the beginning of this one and adding the end of this one, or maybe there's a word that didn't quite sound right and I'll maybe cut in a word, or I sometimes go to that level of micro editing. But for those of you that have listened to some of the vocals I've produced, and particularly on Siobhan's record that's coming out, I think you'll find the vocals are particularly strong. I'm a little biased, but I think they're particularly strong. And then I put the edit together. But as you can see, it's quite common for the checkerboard, as it were, to bounce around, and it's not often things all coming from the same tracks. So in this verse that I'm about to play for you, there's a little bit here, there's a little bit here. Turns out that there were two things on this track, and again, colorized because I liked that what was happening on that track. Line from here, and then there's actually a line from down here. When we were trying to get this one line right, we tried it a million different ways, and then a line from here. So it's quite common for my edits to sort of be checkerboarded all over the place. But what I'm always going for is a cohesive performance that sounds like it was just recorded in one go. And so once I've done that, then I delete all the stuff I didn't use, and I move everything that I did use onto one track, and it looks like Dante's track here. Then I go through and I make sure that everything is clean. So do the fades in and out on a line that's out by itself. Make sure that I've done the crossfades between really tight cuts, and sometimes I have to nudge the edits around a little bit to make them sound natural. So yes, I spend a long time on vocal production, but I think it's always worth it. Anyway, I'm not going to play you this whole tune, but I will play you just the front part of here, the verse that I've started editing, and hopefully you enjoy the song. The song is called Once Upon a Time, and it's about a couple where one person in the couple, Dante, wants to stay together, but the other person in the couple, Siobhan, has had enough of the relationship and she's moving on. So that's what the song is all about, is the back and forth between them, trying to negotiate how to move forward in their relationship. So there's some fun stuff later on in the tune as well, but just to set the stage for this verse, which I'll play for you, and you know, let's have a quick listen to what's happening in the vocals between the two.
Hey.
Hey. I'm heading out.
What you doing? Where you going now? Where you at? Where you at?
I'm sick and tired, uninspired, doubt.
Said to
Everything
you it was all true.
lies.
About tonight.
Not coming back, I'm done with that.
Why?
All right, so as you can hear, Dante's riffing is so smooth and wonderful, and as you can hear, Siobhan's approach is a little edgier, a little bit more aggressive, which I think fits the characters that we wrote into the song as well, which is great. It's really fun. I'll play it for you one more time, but you know, again, check out that organ in the context of the track, and you know, remember how it sort of, we darkened it significantly, and feel how it kind of sits in with the drums. That's another thing that I want you to hear when we listen. So let's listen to it one more time. If you have any questions, feel free to fire them into the chat. But otherwise, after this, we'll say goodbye. But anyway, here we go. We'll play it one more time.
Hey.
It's that scratchy.
Hey.
Sorry, I talked over it. Let's hear it again. But yeah, that scratchy sound is the organ in it, and it just sort of sits in nice with the drums. Check it out.
Hey.
Hey. I'm heading out.
What you doing? Where you going now? Where you at? Where you at?
I'm sick and tired, uninspired, doubt.
Said to
Everything
you it was all true.
lies.
About tonight.
Not coming back, I'm done with that.
Why?
Cool. One more time, and I'll let you watch Dante's track here so you can see where those cuts are. Here we go.
Hey.
Hey. I'm heading out.
What you doing? Where you going now? Where you at? Where you at?
I'm sick and tired, uninspired, doubt.
Said to
Everything
you it was all true.
lies.
About tonight.
Not coming back, I'm done with that.
Why?
Anyway, some folks are surprised with how many cuts with such great singers there are, but whatever it takes to make the vocal as strong as possible, because in a pop song, it's all about the vocal, and maybe checking out some of your old forgotten plugins. Anyway, thanks for joining us again. I will sign off. Check it out. Siobhan Bodrug featuring Dante Brown should be out in the next couple weeks on Spotify and Apple Music and anywhere that you stream music. And thanks. We'll be back a month from now talking about more fun stuff. You know what I wanted to ask you while we're here? One other time, some amazing friends of mine, participants in the Steinberg sessions, sent me sessions to sort of work with here. I want to do that again. So if any of you out there are willing to send me a session, and maybe I can break it down on here, and you know, maybe we could kind of work on it and make it as good as we can do in this context, that would be awesome. So please send me an email if you have a session that you're willing to share. I think it would be really fun to dig into some of your sessions as well. So thanks for coming. It was great to virtually see you all again, and we will see you next month for the November edition of Steinberg Sessions.